Well, hello and welcome to the 2022 Ohioana Book Festival. I'm Claudia Plumley with Great Lakes Publishing, and I'm pleased to welcome you today to the Historical Mysteries panel. First, we'd like to thank our festival sponsors and partners, all of whom you can find on the Ohioana website. And a special thanks to our official bookseller, the Book Loft of German Village. You can get copies of all the books featured at the festival by going online to bookloft.com. For everyone in the audience, we'll be leaving the last 10 minutes of the session for questions. So please fill up the chat section with your questions, and we'll make sure we get to those in those last 10 minutes. And now I'm pleased to introduce our authors today, and a big thanks for them and to the audience too for taking your Sunday evening to join us. So first, I wanted to introduce Erin Flanagan, and she's here promoting her novel, Deer Season. And she just shared that I think it was on Thursday, she won the Edgar Award winner for Best First Novel by an American Author, which is really awesome. Her next novel, Blackout, is forthcoming this fall. She's the author of Deer Season and 2 short story collections, The Usual Mistakes and It's Not Going to Kill You and Other Stories, which is an hilarious title.
Thank you.
She contributes regularly to regular book reviews to Publishers Weekly and other venues, and she's an English professor at Wright State University. So we're delighted to have Erin with us. Next is Nancy Herriman. She is the author, or is promoting No Darkness Like Death, which is a great title. Nancy's retired from an engineering career to take up writing, and we're going to ask her more about that because I'm fascinated about that. But her work has won the Daphne du Maurier Award. And it's the first in her Elizabethan era mysteries series. Searchers of the Dead was released earlier this year, and it's listed as an editor's choice by the Historical Novel Society. When she's not writing, she enjoys singing, gabbing about writing, and eating dark chocolate. That is my kind of woman. And then we have Annalee Huber, who is here promoting her book, A Perilous Perspective, which is a great title. Anna is also a Daphne Award-winning author of the best-selling series Lady Darby Mysteries, the Verity Kent Mysteries, and the Gothic Myths series, as well as the anthology The Deadly Hours. She's a summa cum laude graduate of Lipscomb University in Nashville, where she majored in music and minored in psychology, which is a great background. Then we have Jess Montgomery with us. Jess, that is her pseudonym. Her real name is Sharon Short, but we're going to call her Jess today. And she's here promoting The Stills. Jess is the author of the Kinship Historical Mysteries. Under her given name, she's a newspaper columnist focusing on the literary life, authors, and events of her native Dayton for the Dayton Daily News. And she writes a regular column for Writer's Digest. So 4 really wonderful backgrounds here today and wonderful authors. All of you guys are just really have great careers. So thank you for joining us. I appreciate it. What I wanted to start with, and maybe we can just kind of work our way through the 4 of us, but tell us about your featured book and really what inspired you for that topic. And maybe we can start with Nancy.
Oh, okay. So my featured book, No Darkness as Like Death, is the 4th book in my San Francisco series. I have to check that because I can't remember. And the basic plot line is the death takes place in a health facility, which involves the water cure, which is something that happened in the 1800s. They believed in bathing, drinking lots of water. It was kind of a natural cure. But he's unfortunately died under somewhat mysterious circumstances, of course. So my 2 sleuths get involved. My nurse, Celia Davies, who's the prime sleuth, and she always hooks up with he's a somewhat attractive detective, Nicholas Graves. How does that happen? I don't know. So, but he's an aspiring politician who has managed to make some enemies along the way. So who has possibly done him in. I chose the topic. I chose the victim, perhaps thinking about our own political upheavals or political charged environment. And so I thought, well, that makes an interesting topic. You can imagine a politician getting knocked off. It does happen. And I always like to come up with unusual settings for my mysteries. San Francisco is chock full of them back in the 1800s as well as now. And so I just thought I'd try a health institute and the kind of crazy things that goes on in there. So that's basically my inspiration for the book.
That's interesting. Well, I know you talked about water healing, which I think is a great segue over to Jess to talk about the still and your story. So tell us a little bit about your book too.
The stills. Yes, one does need water for a still in order to make moonshine. So the stills is the third in my kinship historical mystery series. It was inspired by Ohio's true first female sheriff in 1925, a woman named Maud Collins. And so she's the inspiration for Sheriff Lily Ross. And in this particular book, it's 1927. And obviously, prohibition and moonshining and all of that has been in the background of these books before this one. But 1927 is a really interesting year in the history of prohibition, if you start digging into the details, because it was the year that the Bureau was formed to fight violations of the Volstead Act. And it was also a year where the federal government basically poisoned the industrial alcohol supply because they knew that people were drinking industrial alcohol or using it to create concoctions. And so they poisoned the alcohol supply, the industrial alcohol supply, and a lot of people ended up dying. And so in this book, the gangsters are coming through Lily's County, Sheriff Lily's County. She can't just kind of shake her head and go, well, Uncle Arlie's always had a little still. What's the big deal? Because now, gangster crime is coming to her county, and people are starting to also get sick from this tainted alcohol. So several deaths occur, of course, and she gets to investigate.
Wow, I had no idea that industrial alcohol was poisoned. That's amazing.
Yeah. It still is, by the way. They never undid it. So but everybody knows now that they didn't know then, of course. Everybody knows now you would never drink, hopefully nobody would ever drink industrial alcohol, but back then wouldn't taste too great, probably make you sick, but you could until it was poisoned. And I would just like to add that all these novels are co-narrated by Lily and somebody from the community. And in this particular book, her co-narrator is the wife of a gangster and is a bit of a gangster herself. So it was fun to write about a female villain in that way.
Cool.
Oh, well, Erin, why don't you tell us about the deer season? I thought that was really fascinating too.
Sure. So deer season takes place in 1985 in a small town, Guntram, Nebraska. That's based somewhat on the town I grew up in, Iowa, Sanborn. And it's about a teenage girl goes missing the first weekend of deer season, and it's told from Alma Costigan, who is a woman, and her husband Kyle, and Peggy's younger brother Milo. And Hal Bullard is a mentally challenged man who works for the Costigans, and he comes home from that first weekend of hunting with blood in his truck and a mysterious dent at the front of his truck, but swears he had nothing to do with Peggy's disappearance. So it's about the town and how they deal with this tragedy striking and how they somewhat turn on each other depending on who they're trying to keep safe in this story. So yeah, and it was interesting because I grew up in a town so similar to it, and it was a town that I always felt really safe in, but I doubt that was the case for everybody who lived there. So I wanted to explore that a little bit.
Oh, wow. That's really interesting. Yeah. Oh, and let's go to Anna to talk about your book. You're the earliest time frame, I think, that we're talking about today in the 1800s. But there were a lot of parallels I saw with appearances not maybe being what they seem to be to Erin's book when I was researching. So I thought it might be good for you guys to talk about your books back together.
Sure. Yeah. So A Perilous Perspective is the 10th book in my Lady Jarvie series, which are set in 1830 Scotland. And in this book, we are headed back to the Highlands. We haven't been back to the Highlands since book 1. They go to Argyll, which is along the western coast near the Hebrides, and that it's very rural. It's beautiful there. They're there for Kira's cousin is marrying one of her best friends. And I was kind of inspired. So Lady Jarvie is a portrait artist with a macabre past. So I hadn't done anything with art for a few books. And I was like, I really need to bring that back in again, because that's her passion. And I thought, what about art forgeries? And so I started researching art forgeries, and I just fell down that rabbit hole. It's absolutely fascinating. And it was really the inspiration for the plot. They're at this manor house, and Kira stumbles across that there's a couple forgeries. And the owner of the manor is not very happy that she's found these forgeries. He's shocked, of course, not very pleased. And there's kind of a clan rivalry going on in the area. And then a maid from a rival family is found dead beneath these forged paintings. And so they have to figure out what happened. Where did these forged paintings come from? Who killed the maid? All of that. So.
Wow. Well, I know one of the first questions I wanted to ask you was about your research process, because I think any kind of novel is going to require a lot of research, but to learn about forgeries or to study more about hometowns and small towns and maybe how people may not always feel like they belong there, just any of these topics, I think there's so much to research. So I'll let whomever start first that wants to, but let me know kind of how did you go into your research process?
Well, I have a question for Anna really quick. Have you seen Faker Fortune? Have you ever watched that TV show?
Yes, I love that show. Yes. Oh,
I thought you might like that.
A couple different iterations of it. It's wonderful. Yeah. I watched those along with reading stuff. So
yeah, I know my husband loves that show. And so I was like, yeah, you'll be into that. So yeah, it's the premise of the show is they have these old paintings, some of which are like at museums and stuff. And they have this team of people who go in to determine, are these fake or are these fortune? Right. Like, are they the real painting, or did somebody pull one over on somebody?
It's fascinating.
Yeah. It's pretty, and it's got some drama, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It does. Yeah. I mean, I guess just segueing, I when I'm researching, like when I start a series, I do a big chunk of research just on the time period in general and the location, what they ate, what they wore, what they, all the social mores, things like that. And then for each book, it depends on whatever the topic's about or what exact month in history we're at, the things that are going on. And then I just kind of do a deep dive of reading, whether it's social histories or specific. I love to use first person, diaries and journals and letters and things like that. And I do as much research as I can before I start. And then once I am writing, there's always stuff that comes up that you have to look up and figure out. And I would say my best tip for any research is just to check the bibliography in the back of your research books, because I always stumble across even better sources that way.
They tend to be more detailed. That's true. One reason I chose 1860s San Francisco is because the newspapers were in full swing by then, and they're online. And so, if I want to look for specific brands of stoves or food that might be sold, or, the name, I use it for the names of material for dresses, or just to see what's being sold in town. And so, that's that's a heavy resource for me. I mean, when I first started, I did as much as Anna did. I found some first person narratives of life in San Francisco, or somebody had written a very lengthy travel book about visiting, which had all kinds of interesting details. So, but the internet has been a wonderful thing, and certainly for for me. And I have maps and photographs and everything, so I can get a feel for what the city looked like and where things were and what people might have been up to at the time.
Similarly, I had already done a lot of reading about Prohibition in general, so that's how I kind of came across the detail about 1927 and the big changes that year. So I kind of went from there, and I got interested in, you know, the different social opinions about Prohibition. There were all kinds of different views of pros and cons, and the Anti-Saloon League was headquartered in Westerville, which is right by Columbus, and the Anti-Saloon League Museum is there. And so I went. This was just before COVID hit, so I was able to go. Still was naively assuming we'd all be moving about just as we had been. I went to this museum and I got a lot of information, and a lot of it was, again, nuanced. So it helped me kind of understand the issue in more detail. But I will say I'm probably the only person who's ever gone to that museum, spotted the display case that has a Vino Sano brick, which is a dried grapes, like just dried compressed grapes, literally in a brick. And it had a wrapper on it that said, and I already knew this once I found this in my previous research, but on the wrapper it says, whatever you do not dissolve this in water and put it in a dark cabinet and forget about it for 3 weeks. You must not do that. No. And of course, that's exactly what people did.
Yeah,
It literally says that on this brick. And I was so excited to see this brick. I literally like leapt in the air and went, oh my God, a Vino Sano brick. And the few people that were there that day at the museum kind of looked at me like, wow, she's really excited by 100-year-old dried grapes. But
Great story.
That's funny.
Oh
I have to say, I've been to the museum and I have not noticed that brick. So now I must go back and look.
I don't live far away. I'm going to go over and look.
You need to go look. Yes.
I need to go look at the brick.
We all need a pilgrimage. So I feel kind of like the cheat in the group, because I actually wrote about 1985, which I was a young teenager. So the good side is it wasn't as hard for me to research. The downside is I grew up in what's now considered historical times. And I know some historical purists will say, no, it's got to be 50 years or something. Which we're not quite there yet. But so a lot of it I did come from memory, and a lot of the research was just little things like what year would we have gotten a microwave, in that, like, when did Prince's Raspberry Beret come out, that. So it was, all of it was like a walk down memory lane to be like looking this stuff up. And there was some research I had to do as far as like how hunting permits worked in Nebraska and stuff like that. And the thing that continually amazed me in research, and does every time I do any, so I'll be curious to hear your experiences with this, because I think you guys have a lot more research in your books. But I'm always shocked what it gives me, not just like the surprise of the little detail, but I'm like, I can hang a whole plot on this, how does that happen?
I developed an entire character because I was reading a newspaper article and noticed this little advertisement in the section of the newspaper page for a boy looking for his parents that had abandoned him. And it's like, that's become the story for one of my characters in my books.
Wow.
In my, that's his plot line. But I was like, I wasn't looking for that. I was reading something else, but it's like, looking, it happens all the time. I know. And that's the stuff that makes you like, go, whoo, get all giddy, because it's exciting. Like, I love this.
And you have to look at so much stuff then, because you just don't know where it's going to come from. Right. So I'm sure it's just like reading journal, like all of that. Yeah.
That actually was my next question. So you guys are segueing great, but I wanted to ask, what did you uncover in writing your book, or really any of your previous books, that's fascinated you the most? And I think that's an awesome story, Nancy, to be paying attention to an ad. And then you think too about, gosh, what did that say about the times, that's when you advertised for that too? I mean, that's fascinating.
Yeah, it was like looking for my parents. Anyone have news? It was sad, but it's just, it's become a subplot in my books.
Wow.
So yeah, it's very cool. Stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what about the others of you? Was there something that really fascinated you when you were doing that writing and the research that you wanted to talk about, in addition to what you may have already covered with wine brick?
Besides the wine brick, I was fascinated to discover a woman named Mabel Walker Willebrandt, who was the Assistant Attorney General of the US. So she was the highest ranking female federal employee, I guess is the way to put it. And she was super well known. So, it would be like if somebody said, do you know who Reese Witherspoon is? Most of us would say yes. Well, that was Mabel in the day. Now, very few people remember her, but she was charged with enforcing the Volstead Act, and she did have a lot of cases where she, caught the bad guys and what have you, but she quit. She took the job partly because she wanted to become the Attorney General. And then she figured out that, well, they put a woman in the role because they thought, there'd be a lot of wink, wink, nudge, nudge, that she wouldn't really do a whole lot. She wouldn't take her job quite so seriously. And so she realized she was kind of a sacrificial lamb in a sense. And once she figured this out in real life, she left. And then she went to California and she defended people on the other side, the people who were in violation of the Volstead Act. And, she had this amazing career where she did a lot of things to fight for women's rights, actually, in the courtroom as well. And I realized, because one reason she was so famous was she went on speaking tours around the time my novel would have been set. And I thought, well, she would come to Westerville to the Anti-Saloon League and give a speech, right? And that's very close to where Sheriff Lilly is operating. It's about an hour apart drive now, maybe 2 hours back then. So she gets a little cameo appearance in the stills. And I thought it was fun to take, Lilly, who's this strong woman, and doing something really unusual as a sheriff in 1925 in Appalachia, but have her also be like starstruck and in awe of this woman who's almost at the head of our legal system. So it was fun to pull her in. I think if I were going to write nonfiction, I'd write a biography of Mabel.
Do it.
Well, maybe you'll do that someday.
Yeah,
that'd be interesting.
Maybe.
Yeah. Oh.
I think one of the most interesting things I learned, so I had to do all that research on art forgery, and then I had to untangle what Kira could have figured out in 1832. I mean, she wouldn't have had access to X-rays and all these things that they can use now. And so, what could she use to figure out these were forgeries, other than just her expertise and her keen eye and her knowing these artists. And I was surprised to discover that, we have this reverence for these old masters now, but they didn't really look at art the same way in the 19th century. And the people that were taking care of the art in these, big manor houses were like the housekeepers and things like that didn't really understand how art worked. And they were using things like ashes and urine to clean them. They were damaging them. And then the art restorers were doing the same kind of stuff. They were using these things that were like horrible for the paintings. And then they would I can make this better. It's a Rembrandt and they think they can make it better. There wasn't this, so it was, I thought that was just, as a, person who loves art now, I was like horrified, I was like, oh my gosh, what are they doing? But I thought that was really interesting. And I could kind of play with that within the plot. So
yeah, that's a good tip.
That's
That's
fascinating.
awesome.
Think of how much that would have smelled, the ash or urine, just like to have hanging in your home too. What a
And
different
it's this,
time.
aristocrat's manor house, I mean, yeah.
Wow, that's
We were
fascinating.
drafty. Maybe it didn't smell too bad.
True. Oh, the main thing I learned is my memory sucks. Like I couldn't believe how much I got wrong and like would have to go back and check everything. And even just like from 1985, I guess I was one of the things I was just most surprised by was like how nearly every page it seemed there was something to research. Like I wasn't having to go deep to the library like you guys, but even like, oh, would they have worn those tennies? Would they have had, what kind of drugs would they be using for their hog? Like what kind of penicillin, like everything like that. I would just have to, it seemed every page would be something, but
I get rather obsessed with word usage. I want to make sure my words are appropriate to the 1860s. Yeah, and I'm sure you run into the same. But that's so the OED, the online OED is my best friend.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
What is it
But it's
called?
crazy the things you think are old that aren't old,
I know.
and the things that you think are totally old, and then you find out, oh my gosh, that's a 20th century word, So
sometimes I'm like, I thought this word was new and it was like still being used back in the 1850s. It's like, okay, that took me by surprise. It's the OED.
OED.
The OED. Yeah.
the online etymology dictionary.
Yeah.
so you imagine
Well, actually,
me.
I use the Oxford
I'm
English. I use the Oxford
I'm
English
the old.
dictionary. So, but it's wonderful.
Or yeah.
Yeah. There are two of them. They have the same. But anyway, and since I write historicals of a long, when I was writing my Tudor ones, it was great because I would want to know what might be a useful 16th century word for that I was using, and you can use it to look at all they have a historical thesaurus. So if you look up a word, and they can give you like what some Tudor person might have said instead. That was always throw those in every once in a while. It's fun. I like that's
Yeah, there's slang dictionaries. Like there's a Regency slang dictionary that I love to use.
Yeah,
to find, especially of some, London street slang.
Good stuff.
Wow. Well, tell me, I know one thing that everybody's always interested is what your writing process is like. And we're dipping our toe into that a little bit and talking here about the thesaurus and going online, but tell me a little bit more about what your process is and how you go about starting, outlining your story. Just how does that work for you? I'll let whomever wants to start first.
I'll start because I'm thinking of it. So this is kind of like what I just start writing out a basic plot. For instance, this is the book I'm working on right now. And I'll just start going, well, what do I want? What's the murder that I want? Kind of, what's the means, and like who is the person, who might not like them, who are those characters? And then how can this all transpire? Kind of, I just start to get an idea going. I get my little calendar so I remember what day everything happened. Yeah, and then I'll start writing. I used to be an engineer. This is where it shows. I like tables, but so then I'll do like all my suspects and their motives and all the could they have even done it, all that kind of stuff. Of course, and then about 5 chapters in, I do something like that, and I just and I just it never ends up the way it started.
Interesting. So like you might think somebody's guilty, but then
it's changed every single time. Really? Every single time I've written a mystery, I have a completely the last one, the one that just came out, my book that just came out, I changed it in the editing process when my editor, I was like a month away from handing it in. I was like, wait, I got the wrong killer. It's going to take another week.
Wow.
I'm kind of similar. I do an outline and I answer the big questions. I mean, that's what I start with, and the turning points and all that kind of stuff. And I always do psychological workups for all of my characters, and the main ones and secondary. But I like to leave it loose because I know that I'm going to stray from it. My characters are going to rebel. They're going to want some other idea is going to occur to me. And I've discovered if I try to force myself to use the plot I came up with, it doesn't work. I get bored with it. It just yeah, I'm just better off letting my creativity flow. And then, I get 70% through and I end up replotting it to try to get to the end, and my murderer, I've learned to just leave it open book and just set up several people and then, let them tell me when I get to the end who it is. And then I can go back and edit and finesse everything and make it work. So
that makes me feel better because I always think I know who the killer's going to be. And then I haven't quite done it in the editing stage, the final editing stage, but I have, like, for every single book, gone to within like 50 pages of the end and 3 weeks of the due date and gone like Nancy's reaction. That's not who did it. Now I better. So I am, like Hannah said, trying to keep things a little more open as I go along. But I do like to start with character motivations, like what do they, the goal, motivation, conflict, what do they want? Why do they want it? What's at stake? Because I like to kind of ground things in being character driven. So that's where I start. And I always say it's a big mess until it's not. So
yeah.
It does seem like a flip goes one day. And you're like, oh, it might actually hold together.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm the same. I just kind of get in there with this vague sense of like, here's what I think it's going to be about. And then write the discovery draft and kind of hope for the best and get to the end and, oh, yeah, that's not what I thought was going to happen. And then you have to go back. So one thing that I found that's really helpful is I always thought like there has got to be a more efficient way to do this. Like, what am I thinking? But I would try the outline and it would feel pretty stale then. So what I've taken to doing is when I'm writing, I'll as soon as I finish a chapter, I'll outline it. I'll say like, here's the action, here's the information, here are the breadcrumbs. And then, so it's happening after I've written it, but then I feel like, oh, I can look at this as I'm moving forward. And that's helped me a lot because I do feel like the outline is helpful, and then I'll have like a little sketch of the next couple chapters usually. So, but I think also every book is different, which seems totally unfair. Like it should be getting easier.
I like your phrase discovery draft though. I like that.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah, that's a good way of thinking of it.
First draft.
Yes.
Yeah.
The first draft is too much pressure.
Yeah. But discovery, you're just playing, you're just mucking around, you're just seeing what you see. I like that.
Good way
I think it's interesting that you guys are you're in control because you're the author. And coming from my seat, I think, oh, the author had these big plans and knew how things were going to go. So I find it fascinating that you all say, oh, it changed on me. So what causes that? Do the characters kind of develop as you're writing them, or do you just spending time with them, you kind of have different thoughts about that character? I just kind of want to know a little bit more about this. I find this completely fascinating.
So I'll say,
for me, it's that. Oh, go ahead, Erin.
Okay. So I wrote short stories for a long time before I started writing novels. And one of the things that was, I think, the hardest leap for me from stories to novels was not like, I'm not great at math, but I knew it would be a lot longer. But I hadn't quite realized how much deeper it would be. So like, I feel like in short stories, a lot of times what you're looking at is a lot of things are implicit versus explicit. And so I would understand the character in that moment and have a sense of who they had been before, and then this glimmer of who they would be after the story. But I feel like in a novel, you have to go so much deeper to find out like who they are in the story, like based on that past comes in so much more. So this is like a silly example, but in deer season, Alma goes to the grocery store and runs into these women who she thinks are kind of silly, and she's pretty rude to them. And I thought the scene really held together, and my editor was like, oh, can we go a little deeper? And if I had like a shot every time, if it was a drinking game, I had a shot every time, she was like, can we go a little deeper? I mean, I would have been drunk by chapter 2, but she, but like, I understood Alma well enough, but in the chapter, then it had to be like, oh, she'd lived in this town for 14 years. She'd tried to ingratiate herself, but she was always going to be an outsider. She tried to wear her hair a certain way for these women. And like, that's why she was so crabby. And I was just like, oh, look at her being crabby. So for me, I think it was like really understanding characters in a way that I didn't in short stories, that like, that's like how they evolved so much more by the end of the book, that I was like, oh yeah, no, I didn't even understand who they were when I was starting this thing. So that's what it was for me. Like, yeah, I would get to the end and I'd be like, oh, I feel like I've known these people for a lifetime, versus a short story where I had just known them for a weekend or an incident.
Yeah, 100%. It's that going deep. I mean, deep into that point of view, and you're in there. I mean, because when you're outlining, you're just kind of, oh, this vague idea. And, you know, even the psychological workout, you're like, oh yeah, I'll give them this motivation, you know, but when you're writing, you are deep in their point of view. And it's like, they're speaking through you. I mean, it's you, but you know what I mean? And so the things that come out or you learn evolve. I mean, they're different than what you may have just plotted before. So, or the way they're interacting, or the way they see someone else, or a place, you know. So it's that deepness into that point of view.
Jess, Nancy, anything to add?
No, I mean, I think I would agree.
Yeah.
And for me, it's just, sometimes it's just a feeling. It's like, you can't even, it's not a conscious thought. It's more, this doesn't feel right, or they wouldn't do that, or they need to go there, or they need to be, something. And sometimes it takes a while to figure out what you've done. Like for me, it's always like, what did I just do wrong? And where did it go wrong? Because something's happened and I don't like the path I put him on. And then it's kind of like, you have to peel back and figure out, what did I just make them do that they didn't want to do?
Right.
It's almost an intuition, or like a visceral gut feeling, because sometimes I'll get them going the wrong way, and I'll try to convince myself this is logical. This makes sense. And it does on paper, but my gut is like, yeah, no. And so then no. And so then I've learned to try to trust. That sounds very woo-woo, and I'm not a woo-woo person at all, but I've learned to try to trust that and not fight it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I don't know. Also, have you guys ever, sometimes I'll be writing along and I'll like include something and I'll be like, I'm not sure why I put that in there, but okay, I'm just going to let it sit for a while. And then it's like, 200 pages later, I'm like, oh, that's why that's in there. I'm a genius, you know?
Yeah. I'm brilliant.
You know?
Yeah.
I always like to say that the story is smarter than the writer, and thank God, right? Like, I'm like, things are going on in there that are so far ahead of like what I was thinking at the time.
That's a good. Yeah, sometimes you like pick up something, or you'll see the character will see something, or they'll cross paths with somebody. You're like, I don't know why they needed to be walking down the street right then, but we're gonna leave it in, and it'll come in handy later.
Yes. Yes.
And I like to say, serve the story. Yeah. So, because I think, every choice you make should be to serve the story, not your own ego, not your writerly tricks that you want to show off, or because you think, oh, this will be commercial or whatever. You got to serve the story, which again sounds really woo-woo. But I like that Erin says the story is smarter than the writer, because I feel better serving a story if it's smarter than me. So.
No, I have a question, because you guys are all writing about murders. And you spend time with the characters and they join your lives. Is there a character? What if you don't like a character? Is that hard for you to spend time with that person? And or do you really like them despite what they've done? Like, how does that work for
me? I try to make every character, I mean, like I do that psychological workup, and they're like, for me, every character has some redeeming qualities. Like, nobody is just this horrible, evil person. I mean, I don't write about serial killers or anything. So maybe that would be different. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. But all of my villains, there's always a reason why they're doing what they're doing. And a lot of times it's something we can honestly relate to. I mean, so I think that helps. And I also write first person, so I never have to go into their head. I'm always writing from my heroines' point of view, but just in thinking about them, that's
It's interesting.
Yeah, and I always like to similarly ask myself, because I really don't like my bad guys very much, and I write third person, so but but it's a controlled third person, so I'm not writing from the point of view of my bad guys so much. But I always ask myself, why do they think they're right? Like if I ask them why are you right, they would have a reason there, and it would be obvious to them, just like it's obvious to me why I'm right about certain things. And like I said, with the stills, the co-narrator with Sheriff Lily is a woman named Fiona, who's married a mobster, and she's very manipulative and has very questionable ethics. But I really kind of surprised myself with how much fun that was, because I was in her point of view for half of the chapters, and it was like, oh, I get to cut loose and be wicked. This is fun.
So what's that saying is like the villain is the hero of their own story. So
Yeah.
you just need to, keep that in mind.
Yeah, what I'm working on right now, I get to start writing, I guess it would be the villain's point of view. That I'll start that this week, and I'm so excited. I'm afraid I'm gonna fall in love with her. I think she's gonna be complicated and very convinced of her own rightness in the story. So I'm like, oh, I can't wait.
Yummy.
That's awesome.
My next question for you is, how do you keep inspired and creative? I mean, you've all written multiple books or short stories. How do you stay inspired and creative and come up with that next thing? What do you do?
I don't know that I find it easy. I find it hard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, especially if you're writing a series. I feel like, Anna has written far longer one than mine, but I start to feel like, oh, didn't I already talk about these people, or didn't I already discuss that topic haven't I already addressed this issue with these two? So yeah, I don't know. I don't have an answer to that, I don't think.
I would say with my series, I don't know, I've peopled it with so many secondary characters, and a lot of them, people want me to revisit. So that helps. It gives me the plots, like they're like, when are you going to bring back this person? When are you going to bring, so
that's true.
It gives me things to go for. And also looking at history, just like there's, moments I know I want to cover, or events. And so that kind of helps me drive the plot, or it's just like a location I really want to visit, my characters to visit, so I can write about it. There's certain areas, like the Dartmoor book, I totally wrote just because I wanted to write a book set in Dartmoor because I love Dartmoor. So yeah, but I don't know. I think to myself that everything is fodder. So I'm just always writing notes. It could be anything. I could, a song I hear on the radio, or a documentary I watch, or whatever. It could somehow I could twist that and make it a story. So, or make it work for my characters anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know about inspiration. I feel like I just keep plugging along. It's not very sexy, but I'm like, I'm always been one of those writers too, who I'm like, I'm lucky if I have an idea at a time. I see all these people who are like, oh, I have a million ideas always going. I could just, look at my notebook, and I'm like, I got one. Like I'm lucky to have it, so I'm like, I don't know. I think that authors often feel like they're the wrong kind of writer. Like, oh, I should feel inspiration. And I'm like, oh no, I just got to get my butt to the coffee shop and try and get 1,000 words, So I'm like, it's just kind of staying in the story and trying to move forward and really loving the work of it more so than the inspiration.
The pandemic really did it for me, because I stopped going to the coffee shop to write. And even though I write historicals, there's nothing like conversations going on around you to get your head spinning with conflict ideas, or just little that, people don't change over the centuries. So, these two people having this conversation over here could work in the 1800s, so.
Yeah. And I think that so many people, there are so many writers, their process had to change during the pandemic, either where you would write, or how you would get inspired and all of that. One positive I'll say that for me during the pandemic is I felt like I gave myself a lot more grace. Like every day I'd be like, just do your best, Erin. And some days that would be like, I'd write 1,500 words. And some days I would be like, okay, I guess we're going to just watch Netflix today. That's Erin doing her best and she's going to take some naps. But I stopped like BSing myself. Like really, if I got up and I was having one of those pandemic days where I'm like, you know what? I don't think I can do anything. But then when I'd get up and be like, I don't think I can do anything. And I'd be like, you know, you can. Like, come on. You know, so I like, somehow I felt like I treated myself with a little more grace, but I also was not going to take excuses. And that I've tried to keep that going.
I like that. Yeah, I think just showing up to do the work, you know, because most of the time I swim for exercise, and the pool is, you know, kind of cold when you first get in. And I'm always amused by the people who get in and say, it's cold. And I always want to say, yes, just like it was yesterday and the day and tomorrow and the day, you know, it is cold, but if you just get in and you dunk down and get moving, it won't feel cold anymore. And that's how I feel about writing is I never sit down and go, yes, I always think up until the very second I think, oh, I'm ready to go. Yeah, I'm so excited. And I sit down and it's like, or I could check the news or it's like, you just dive in. It's going to be cold. It's going to be awkward. But if you keep moving,
you'll get there.
You'll get there and you'll fall into this kind of rhythm.
I think there's this intimidation too, that comes down to, okay, I'm going to write. And so it's like, there's this perfection in your head of what you're going to write, you know? And so when you start, you know, it's never going to be perfect. And so it's just getting past that hurdle. You know what I mean? Like,
I find the first couple of chapters can be really, really hard you know, because it's like, I'm expecting this, you know, full-fledged idea to pop out of my brain or something. And, you know, it's like, so now, you know, by the time I get to 5 or 6, it's like, it's going, we're just going to keep following it.
Yeah. Well, and I think if you put yourself in this pressure of like if you say to yourself, oh, now I'm going to think great thoughts. I don't know about you all, but I would be like, I got nothing.
I got it.
You know, so you just kind of have to just dive in and do it.
That's good advice. Oh, well, I know we've got a couple questions here in chat, and if anybody else listening has any, please populate that feed for us. But let's start off. I think Karen's question is something that you guys just kind of hit on when we were talking about process, but let's talk about that one first. So she's got a question about series versus standalone books, and why did 3 of you write series, and why did Erin go for standalone? So kind of what keeps you, what makes you gravitate toward one or the other?
I'll go first since I'm the odd person out. But again, like I came from stories, so I'm like, you want me to go from 20 words to 300? And then 300 more, like in a series. I couldn't even, there's no way I could have ever even gotten my head around that. So like I am, and like, again, feeling like you're always kind of like the wrong kind of author. I think, oh, it'd be so great to do a series because then I would know kind of this would be the next book or this would, you know, and these standalones, like you would have to keep coming up with one. But I mean, we are the writers where we are. So I am so curious to hear like about the series and at what point, you know, like this has the legs. This is not just a one book. I feel like, thank God I got the one, you know. So I'm so curious.
Well, I thought I had written a standalone with the first book in the series, The Widows. And so I had no intention that this was to be a series until my editor said, you know, she was curious about the people and the world. And she said, do you realize what a cast of characters you've created? Readers will probably be curious to find out what happens next. And I honestly felt like, no, I didn't understand that until she pointed it out. And so once I realized, oh gosh, I do have this big cast of characters and I have these dual narrators, and I knew right away it couldn't be the same 2 narrators for every book because that I would just be shoehorning plot to fit that and it would not work. And then when I hit on, oh wait, you know, it's the kinship series. It's about kinship in all kinds of ways. It's about community. I can have Lily as, you know, she's the main protagonist of the whole series, but it can be her and a person from the community co-narrating each book. And that way we get to explore different aspects of the community and how different people see her and how she sees them. So that really opened it up for me. But I would love to write a standalone. So there you go.
Yeah, I would too. I had written standalone historical novels before I wrote my mysteries, but this is kind of a weird answer, but my agent sold a series, so I had to produce a series.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's, I wasn't adverse to the idea at all. I mean, I felt like it would be nice. I thought it would just be 3 books, that's it. I thought, we can do a story arc that encompasses more than 1 book. Yeah, so it was kind of like, well, I think my agent told me I'm going to sell a series and you're going to write a series. And so come up with story outlines for 3 books in a series, and I'm going to sell that. Okay.
Well, that was something in the Cozy panel that they talked about too. It's interesting that for both of you, it was kind of something that editors and agents, like how much of that decision is run by the business, or not run by, but suggested by the business. And they were saying in that panel that sometimes it would just, they would decide based on sales, like the series is now over. And
Right.
you wouldn't say goodbye to the characters in
Right.
such a, and I was, that was totally fascinating to me.
Yeah. And it's a little heartbreaking when you've got a series planned and it's suddenly, well, it didn't happen. So
yeah, no, I'm sure. Like, yeah.
I knew my best books, I would like to continue to write them at some point in the future, but I'm working on my San Francisco books right now. But I intentionally left a cliffhanger at the end of the 2nd book when I knew that I wasn't going to get a 3rd one. I'm like, this is so cruel.
Oh.
It ends.
Aww.
We're going to get to that 3rd book someday, but not yet.
It's a great series. Yeah.
I know. I love
the best ones. I love them. I actually started writing Lady Darby and the Verity Kent series as series. I just wanted to write series. And for me, the appeal is that you get to be with those characters for longer. So you're not just exploring them for the space of 1 book. I wanted to make these really complex characters that were in their darkest moment at the beginning of the series in a lot of cases, and just see where I could take them. So I could really stretch the arc out. And I got a 3-book contract to begin with. And I was just like, oh no, I'm just going to hope it's going to go longer. I'm just going to plan this really big arc. And fortunately it worked out well for me, but maybe that wasn't the way to go because I didn't know it would, but I don't know. For me, that's what it is. I get to create this whole world and all these secondary characters, and it just feels real to me now. I mean, both of them, they're 90 years apart in time, but they're just their own worlds and their own people. And so it's more expansive. That's
I'm sure you've experienced this too, but it's so fun when I have readers, they're like, well, whatever happened, what's going to happen at some secondary character? Are we ever going to find out about them? Are they ever going to do this? Are you going to bring back that guy? Cause I mean, as you said, are you going to bring that? Cause he was like, I want him to come back into the story. Okay. Well, I'm like, yeah, okay. We'll do that. We'll take notes and get it in while you can, because I can have books to write. I'm contracted for more. I can fit that in.
That's so fun. I love that people are so honest with you about like what about your characters and how they feel, and you can tell that they've taken that person, and that's your story is part of their life. I mean, what a compliment.
Well, it's so rewarding. I mean, that's why we're here.
Yeah,
that's true.
100%.
Oh, well, let's get to Joel's question. But he wanted to ask, what historical period would you like to write about in the future? Which I think is really awesome to think about. You've written about these time frames. Is there someplace else, another time in history that you'd like to talk about, and why?
Well, I'd like to write about the 1930s.
Go ahead, Jess. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I would like to write about the 1930s. I find that era fascinating. I find the 50s and 60s fascinating, sort of mid-century history. But I have thought about books set way back in 500 BC. So I'd like to go way back in time with a couple of ideas I have. So.
Oh, wow.
Why? Because the ideas won't leave me alone. That's why.
That's a good reason.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say 1950s. I would be very interested to look at women in America. And
Mhm.
I think we have this kind of Mad Men idea of what that was like, but I would be very curious to see what other kind of worlds there were going on then too.
I like the 1930s too. I have actually a huge stack of resource material that I bought because I was thinking of a plot for a book set in San Francisco. I have an obsession with San Francisco, set in San Francisco in the 1930s, because I like a lot of the social unrest that was going on. And that's always kind of something I like to pursue, those kind of concepts. But I am such a Victorian, I just love the Victorian period just because it's echoed so thoroughly in today in terms of all the issues and everything that was going on, that I just cannot leave it alone. Sadly.
Yeah, I mean, I write 1830s Regency and post World War I. But if I had to pick one more, I would maybe do like colonial America, or not Revolutionary War America, Revolutionary War France. That kind of era kind of fascinates me. But that's the only one I can really think of other than what I'm doing right now. So.
Okay. Well, I think we have time for one more question. So I'm going to ask my favorite one, and that's that I think writers always know the best books. So I wanted to see what are you guys reading now that you'd like to share?
So I just not too long ago finished the Damage by Caitlin Wearer, and it was fantastic. It's about it takes place in Portland, Maine, and it's about a man gets sexually assaulted and how it affects his family when it happens, and also like a few years later what the fallout's all been. It's really fantastic. Oh, I just loved it.
So I'm reading two fiction books at the same time now, which I usually don't do. But one is called The Shadow House, and it's a contemporary suspense. It's set in Australia on a like a eco farm, like almost a commune, not quite. And it's very creepy so far and page turny. I really am enjoying it a great deal. And then I'm reading a romance, kind of a romance, women's fiction called The Kindred Spirits Club. And it's about a young woman with anxiety disorders who is trying to forge a career away from her family, but is also caught up in the family business of seeing ghosts and helping them move on. And this ability that she has gotten in the way of her relationships, because she'll find herself like talking to the ghost, which nobody else can see, like in the middle of a party or at work or whatever. So she's trying to figure that out. And also the cute guy who doesn't seem to mind too much that she just randomly will look in the corner and say, well, yes, Mary Beth, I think that's a great idea, or whatever. So it's very charming. It's very charming. I'm really enjoying it. The Kindred Spirits Supper Club.
Sounds fun. Sounds very fun. I dove into, like, since I was thinking about a 1930s book, I read some books written in the 1930s. I did a little bit of a classic. So I read the Nancy Mitford novels, which are a hoot and a half to read. I absolutely love those. But I tend to read magazines because I feel like I don't know. I'm one of those writers that I can't stand to read other writers because I get jealous, I guess. So I read magazines.
That's a good thing.
I just read Tessa Arlen's newest historical fiction. It's a dress of Violet Taffeta. I think is what it's called. She comes out in June or July. It's about Lady Duff Gordon, who's a fashion designer. She survived the Titanic. It was really wonderful, beautiful prose. And I'm just now reading Because I Could Not Stop for Death. It's Amanda Flower's first historical mystery. It's about Emily Dickinson as her sleuth. So I'm just getting into that one. So
good writer. That'll be fun.
Oh, great suggestions. Oh, well, I just want to thank all four of you today for joining us and taking your time on a Sunday to talk about your books and just about your process in general. This has been fascinating to hear from you. So thank you. And I wanted to remind the audience that you can get a copy of those books at the Book Loft. Go to bookloft.com. They're all for sale. And also a thanks again to our festival sponsors and partners, and just a thanks to everyone for joining us today. We've got a lot of people listening in today, so thank you. And please check out the Ohioana's website for more of the festival programming and some other. You can go back and watch the other series and conversations that had. I know I want to go listen to the cozy the talk that you guys have referenced. So just a big thank you to everyone for your time today. Thanks so much.
Thank you. And thank you.
Thank
Claudia.
you.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. This has been great. Bye.
Bye.